Seriously, this is what you cooked for my promotion? Brian's harsh words sliced through the air, shattering the joyful mood that had filled our dining room moments earlier. I stared at him in disbelief, my heart sinking as his eyes narrowed with disgust at the meal I had spent hours preparing, his favorite, creamy mushroom risotto. The kids froze, their forks halfway to their mouths, sensing the sudden shift in their father's demeanor. "Brian, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "I thought you loved this dish." He scoffed, pushing his plate away. "Loved it? This tastes like cardboard. How hard is it to follow a simple recipe?" Jake's lip began to quiver, and Zoe's eyes welled up with tears. I reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on each of their arms. "Daddy's just joking around," I lied, forcing a smile. "Why don't we all take a break and come back to our food when it's cooled down a bit?" Brian shot me a contemptuous glare, but I refused to meet his gaze, focusing instead on comforting our children. As they scampered off to play, I turned to my husband, my heart pounding. "What's gotten into you?" I hissed, keeping my voice low. "You're scaring the kids." He leaned back in his chair, a smug grin spreading across his face. "I'm just being honest, Ellie. If you can't handle the truth, that's your problem." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my lips. This wasn't the caring, supportive man I had married. The one who had celebrated every minor accomplishment in our lives, who had doted on our children and made them feel like the center of the universe. As I watched him rise from the table and stride out of the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted irrevocably within our family. And for the first time, I found myself questioning the man I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. Over the next few days, Brian's behavior only grew more erratic and disturbing. The man I had once admired for his gentle strength and unwavering devotion to our family had been replaced by a sneering, cold-hearted stranger. "Listen up, you little brats," he barked at Jake and Zoe one morning as they dawdled over their breakfast. "When I tell you to do something, you do it. No questions asked, understand?" The kids nodded meekly, their eyes wide with fear. I stepped in, my heart racing. "Brian, that's enough," I said firmly. "They're just children. There's no need to speak to them that way." He turned his icy glare on me. "And you," he spat, "don't think I haven't noticed the way you've been coddling them, undermining my authority. It stops now." I recoiled, stunned by the venom in his voice. Before I could respond, he stormed out of the house, leaving us all shell-shocked in his wake. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, I called my Uncle Tom, desperate for advice. "He's like a different person," I sobbed into the phone. "I don't know what's happening to him, but it's scaring me, Tom, and the kids are terrified." Uncle Tom's voice was gentle but firm. "You need to get out of there, Ellie. At least for a little while, until we can figure out what's going on with Brian. Stay with your parents, or come to my place. Just get yourself and the kids to safety." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "I can't just leave," I protested. "He's my husband, the father of my children. I have to try to help him, to get through to him." "Ellie?" Uncle Tom sighed heavily. "Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who can hurt us the deepest. Promise me you'll at least consider getting out for a while, okay? For the kids' sake, if nothing else." I promised, but deep down I knew I wouldn't leave. Not yet. I had to believe that the man I loved was still in there somewhere, buried beneath this new, twisted persona. And I was determined to find him, no matter what it took. I knew I had to get to the bottom of Brian's disturbing transformation, no matter how painful the truth might be. Late one night, after he had stormed off to bed, I crept downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. From the living room, I could hear the faint murmur of his voice, punctuated by occasional bursts of hushed laughter. Straining to listen, I made out the words "Megan" and "can't wait to see you again." A wave of nausea washed over me as the realization hit. My husband was having an affair. I pressed my ear closer to the door, tears stinging my eyes as Brian's sickly sweet endearments floated out to me. "You're the only one who understands me, Megan, the only one who makes me feel alive." White-hot anger surged through me, momentarily overshadowing the hurt and betrayal. How dare he? How dare he throw away everything we'd built together, our family, our vows, for some cheap fling? I burst through the door, my hands balled into fists at my sides. "So that's it, then?" I spat, my voice shaking with rage. You're just going to toss me and the kids aside for some young thing at work? Brian whirled around, his face flushing crimson as he scrambled to end the call. Ellie, it's not what you think. Don't lie to me, I screamed, all pretense of composure abandoned. I heard everything, you miserable bastard. How could you do this to us? He narrowed his eyes, his lips curling into a sneer. Don't act so innocent, Ellie. You've been smothering me for years, treating me like a child instead of a man. Megan understands me, respects me. She's not some nagging shrew like you. The words stung like a physical blow, but I refused to back down. You're a coward, Brian. A selfish, spineless coward. And if you think for 1 second that I'm going to stand by and let you destroy this family, you're sadly mistaken. He laughed then, a harsh, grating sound that chilled me to the bone. Oh, really? And what are you going to do about it, huh? Leave me? Go ahead, be my guest. But just remember, without me, you and those brats are nothing. In that moment, as I stared into the cold, dead eyes of the man I had once loved more than life itself, I knew our marriage was over. The only question was, how far was I willing to go to protect my children from the monster their father had become? After my confrontation with Brian, I knew I had to get out. But where could I go? With no job and no savings of my own, I was completely dependent on him financially. That's when I remembered my parents' offer to let me stay with them if things ever got bad. At the time, I had brushed it off, certain that Brian and I were solid. But now, I dialed their number with trembling fingers, praying they would answer. Mom picked up on the third ring. Ellie? Sweetheart, what's wrong? Her voice was laced with concern. I took a deep, shuddering breath. Mom, I need your help. Brian, The words stuck in my throat as a fresh wave of tears spilled down my cheeks. Say no more, she said firmly. Your father and I will be there first thing in the morning to get you and the kids out of there. You just focus on packing a bag, okay? Relief washed over me, closely followed by a pang of guilt. But, Mom, I can't just show up on your doorstep with no warning. What about... Don't you dare finish that sentence, Ellie Scott. She cut me off. You are my daughter, and those babies are my grandchildren. There is nothing in this world more important than keeping you all safe. Do you understand me? I nodded weakly, fresh tears blurring my vision. Thank you, I whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you guys. The next morning, as promised, my parents arrived just after sunrise. Brian had already left for work, thank God. I didn't think I could face him again, not after last night. Dad pulled me into a fierce hug as soon as I opened the door. It's going to be okay, sweetie, he murmured, stroking my hair. We're going to get through this, I promise. With their help, we packed up what little we could and left that house behind, at least for the time being. As we drove away, the kids clutching their favorite stuffed animals in the back seat, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness for the life I thought we'd had. But that life, I realized, had been a lie, and it was time to start over, no matter how hard it might be. My first call once we were settled at my parents' place was to my Aunt Linda, who worked as a realtor. If I was going to build a new life for me and my kids, I needed my own place. Don't you worry about a thing, honey, she assured me when I explained the situation. I'll find you the perfect little nest egg, you'll see. Just focus on those babies for now. True to her word, within a week, Linda had lined up a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in a good school district. It wasn't much, but it was ours, a safe haven, free from Brian's toxic influence. As I signed the lease, finally feeling like I could breathe again, I made a silent vow. From now on, protecting my children would be my top priority. No matter what it took, I would make sure they never had to experience the fear and pain their father had inflicted on our family. If exposing Brian's true nature to the world was the only way to keep them safe, then so be it. The gloves were off. The move into our new apartment was bittersweet. On one hand, I was relieved to finally have a safe space for me and the kids, away from Brian's toxic presence. But it also meant accepting that my marriage was truly over, and that hurt in a way I could never have prepared for. As the movers unloaded the last of our meager belongings, I surveyed the empty living room with a heavy heart. So many dreams, so many hopes for our future, all gone up in smoke because of one man's selfish actions. Mommy? Jake's small voice broke through my reverie. Is Daddy coming to live with us here too? I knelt down and pulled him into a tight embrace, fighting back tears. No, baby. Daddy, he's going to stay at our old house for a little while. Zoe toddled over, her brow furrowed in confusion. But why? Doesn't Daddy love us anymore? Of course he does, sweetie, I lied through my teeth. At this point, I wasn't even sure Brian was capable of love. Sometimes, grown-ups just need a little break from each other, that's all. The kids seemed to accept my explanation for now, but I knew that as they grew older, more questions would inevitably come, and I dreaded the day when I'd have to tell them the full, ugly truth about their father. In the days that followed, I threw myself into making our new place a home, determined to create a safe haven for my little family. But I also knew I couldn't hide from Brian forever. Sooner or later, we'd have to face each other again. That day came about a week after we moved in. I was unloading groceries when I heard a familiar laugh drifting through the parking lot. I froze, my heart pounding, as two figures rounded the corner. Brian, with his arm slung casually around the waist of a young, pretty blonde. Megan, the woman he'd betrayed me for. Before I could turn and leave, she spotted me, her eyes going wide with surprise, and was that fear? Brian, oblivious, merely grinned wolfishly. Well, if it isn't my darling wife, he sneered. Quite the little love nest you've made for yourself here, Ellie. I opened my mouth to respond, but Megan beat me to it. Please, Brian, don't start anything, she pleaded, her voice trembling. We were just heading out. He shrugged her off roughly. Don't be rude, Megan. Can't you see Ellie and I have some catching up to do? The smug look on his face made me want to vomit. But then I noticed the way Megan flinched at his harsh tone, and a tiny spark of realization flickered to life. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the villain in this story after all. Actually, Brian, I think Megan's right, I said coolly. You two run along and have fun. I've got better things to do with my time than trade insults with a lying snake like you. His eyes narrowed dangerously, but I held my ground. With a disdainful snort, he turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving Megan standing there looking utterly lost. On impulse, I reached out and touched her arm gently. Are you okay? She startled, then gave a small, sad shake of her head. No, I'm really not. In that moment, I made a decision, one that would change both our lives forever. Why don't you come inside? I offered. I think you and I need to have a little talk. Over the next few weeks, Megan and I formed an unlikely alliance, bound together by our shared experience of Brian's cruelty. As she opened up about the harassment and manipulation she'd endured at his hands, both at work and in their twisted relationship, a plan began to take shape in my mind. It was time to expose Brian for the monster he truly was, not just to me and Megan, but to the entire world. Are you sure about this, Ellie? Megan asked one afternoon as we pored over the evidence I'd painstakingly collected. Photos, emails, even a secret recording of one of Brian's vile, threatening phone calls. If we go through with this, there's no going back. I squared my jaw, my hands trembling only slightly as I looked her in the eye. I'm sure. He needs to be stopped, Megan. For your sake. For mine. For the kids. Who knows how many other lives he's destroyed with his lies and his abuse? She nodded slowly, her expression hardening with resolve. Okay, then. Let's do this. The next morning, I marched into the supermarket where Brian worked, the weight of the manila envelope in my hands grounding me like an anchor. I asked to speak with the store manager, my heart pounding in my chest. Brian's smug face fell the second he saw me stride through the door, Megan at my side. You, he growled, rising from his seat. What the hell is going on here? That's what I'd like to know, Mr. Jeffries, the manager interjected coolly. He fixed Brian with a steely glare. These ladies have brought some disturbing allegations to my attention. Care to explain yourself? For a moment, Brian looked almost comically flustered, his mouth working soundlessly. Then the mask slipped back into place, that cold, dead-eyed sneer I knew all too well. I don't know what lies these two psychos have been feeding you, he spat. But I can promise you, it's all a bunch of crazy, vindictive nonsense. This one, he jabbed a finger at me, has had it out for me ever since I left her pathetic ass. White-hot rage licked at my insides, but I forced myself to remain calm, turning to the manager with an eerie sense of tranquility. With all due respect, sir, I think the evidence speaks for itself. I handed him the file, watching impassively as he flipped through the contents, the photos of Megan's bruises, The recordings of Brian's threatening calls, the statements from other employees corroborating his pattern of intimidation and harassment. The manager's face drained of color as he digested it all. When he finally looked up at Brian again, there was a new hardness in his eyes and more than a hint of disgust. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my store and don't even think about coming back. We'll be launching a full investigation into incidents, but I can promise you, your career here is over." For once, Brian seemed to have no snide comeback, no smarmy deflection. He simply stared at me, anger and hatred burning in his eyes. In that moment, I knew he saw me for what I truly was, not a meek, helpless victim, but a force to be reckoned with. Someone who would stop at nothing to protect herself and those she loved. As security escorted him from the building, I felt Megan's hand slip into mine, giving it a gentle, grateful squeeze. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and triumph. "You saved me, Ellie. You saved us both." And in that moment I knew that no matter what lay ahead, it would all be worth it. Because this time, finally, the price for Brian's cruelty was one he wouldn't just be able to walk away from. Brian's downfall was swift and brutal after our explosive confrontation at the supermarket. Within days, news of his suspension and the impending investigation had spread like wildfire, both among his former colleagues and throughout our small community. At first, he tried to downplay it all, putting on that same smarmy, arrogant front he'd perfected over the years. "It's all just a misunderstanding," he insisted whenever someone dared to ask about the rumors. "Those vengeful witches are trying to ruin me, but they don't have a shred of proof." Oh, how wrong he was. With Megan's brave testimony and the mountain of evidence we'd compiled, the investigation quickly uncovered a sordid pattern of abuse and harassment stretching back years. Employee after employee came forward, emboldened by our actions, to share their own horror stories about Brian's cruel, bullying behavior. Even some of his buddies from the loading dock, the same ones who used to laugh and high-five him in the break room, turned against him when confronted with the ugly truth. I always knew Jeffries was a bit of an ass, one former friend confided to me with a shamefaced look. But I never imagined he was capable of the stuff you exposed. It's like he was living this whole secret, twisted life none of us ever saw. As the evidence mounted, the supermarket chain had no choice but to terminate Brian's employment, effective immediately, ensuring he would never be hired by any of their stores again. But that was just the start of his very public humiliation. It turned out Megan's father was a senior executive at the company's national headquarters. When he learned the full extent of how his beloved only daughter had been mistreated and manipulated by her manager, he was apoplectic with rage. Megan begged him not to get involved, worried it would seem like she was using her family connections unfairly. But her father was having none of it. "That depraved monster took advantage of my little girl," he growled, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "He's going to pay for what he did, Megan. I'll make damn sure of it." True to his word, within a matter of days, Brian's name and photo were circulated on an internal corporate watch list, complete with a stern warning about his history of abusive behavior. No matter where he applied, every potential employer would see that scarlet letter blazoned across his file. His once bright career prospects had been torched, going up in flames, alongside the shattered remains of his ego. Everywhere he went, Brian was met with scornful looks and whispers from those who now saw him for the manipulative, vindictive snake he truly was. At one point, he even tried slithering back to me, his tail tucked between his legs, begging for a second chance. "Ellie, please," he whimpered, his eyes wet with self-pitiers. "I'm a broken man. You've taken everything from me. My job, my reputation, my whole life. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me? For the kid's sake?" I'll never forget the look of pure, unadulterated disgust that twisted my features as I stared him down, revulsion roiling in the pit of my stomach. "Forgive you?" I spat, my voice dripping with contempt. "After what you put me through? After how you terrorized and abused all those innocent people just to feed your massive ego?" I leaned in until our faces were just inches apart, holding his pathetic gaze hostage with my own. "Not a chance in hell, Brian. Now get out of my sight before I have you arrested for trespassing. You're nothing to me anymore. Nothing but a cautionary tale, a living embodiment of karma." As he slunk away, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt a profound sense of catharsis wash over me. The demon that had nearly destroyed my family was finally exorcised, vanquished by the light of truth and justice. It was over. I'd won. And deep down, I knew my new life, our new life, was just beginning. With Brian finally out of our lives for good, an incredible weight lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe freely again without the constant fear and anxiety that had plagued me during those dark days of his emotional abuse. Of course, life as a newly single mother came with its own unique set of challenges. There were days when the stress and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me entirely. But thankfully, I had an amazing support system in the form of my parents, aunt and uncle to help pick up the slack. "You just focus on those babies, sweetie," Mom would insist whenever I tried to protest their generosity. "Let us old folks worry about the rest," and worry they did. From driving the kids to dance classes and soccer practice, to stocking my fridge with home-cooked meals, to simply being there to lend an ear whenever I needed to vent my frustrations. Their love and unwavering support was the balm that soothed my wounded soul. In time, a new sense of normalcy began to take root in our little household. The kids blossomed under the safety and stability of our fresh start, quickly putting the trauma of their father's actions behind them with the beautiful resilience that only children can possess. As for me, I found strength and purpose in throwing myself into my work at the consulting firm and being the best mother I could possibly be. Uncle Tom was thrilled to give me more responsibility, praising my ability to keep a cool head under pressure, a quality he joked must have been forged in the fires of my recent ordeal. "I always knew you were one tough cookie, Ellie girl," he'd say with a wink and that signature twinkle in his eye. "But after seeing you take down that low-life ex of yours, sheesh, I'm just glad I was never on your bad side." We'd share a laugh, but underneath the joviality was a profound sense of pride. In myself, in how far I'd come, in the life I was building from the ashes of my shattered dreams. The months rolled by, and soon it had been over a year since I'd last laid eyes on Brian's wretched face. I hoped he was suffering, wherever he'd slithered off to, that the consequences of his cruel, selfish actions weighed on him every single day. As for me and my little tribe, we were positively thriving. There was a lightness to our days now, an infectious joy that came from being truly, blissfully free from his toxic presence. My biggest worries were making sure the kids got to their activities on time and that I'd remembered to stock up on their favorite snacks. Simple, wonderful little things that I'd once taken for granted, before my life was turned upside down. Sitting on the couch one evening, watching Jake and Zoe playfully squabble over the TV remote, I felt an overwhelming surge of love and gratitude wash over me. These two incredible little humans, their bright smiles and raucous laughter filling our cozy living room, was my reason for enduring the darkness, for pressing on even when it felt impossible, for standing my ground and refusing to let a vile, manipulative bully rob me of the life I deserved. As my gaze drifted over the framed photos lining the walls, candid snapshots of birthday parties and family vacations, reminders of the joy that had once dominated our household, a serene sense of peace settled over me. Brian was a ghost, a distant and increasingly faded memory from a past life. This right here and now was my present, my future. And as long as I had these two amazing kids by my side, come what may, I knew we would be just fine.